to In-House Connect's Humans of LegalTech, where we get to meet the founders of the legal tech companies that are powering today's legal departments. I'm thrilled to have on with us today Praful Saklani, the co-founder and CEO of Pramata, the radically simple CLM platform trusted by some of the largest companies in the world for over 17 years. I didn't realize that there were CLM companies that existed for 17 years. It feels like a more recent phenomenon, but I'm thrilled to have Praful on with us today, and we're going to get into your background and learn about your journey and the journey of Pramata. So welcome to In-House Connect. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Shai. I appreciate it.
Wonderful, wonderful. So let's get into it. And it's really interesting. I've gotten to interview a lot of legal tech founders, and I'm sensing like most of them do not have any legal background. They do not go to law school. They're not work at a law firm. Is that the case here?
It is the case, but I will say that I very much founded Pramata on the basis of true legal pain that I think almost anybody who watches this video will empathize with. So back in 2001, I was selling a previous company to a counterparty, and we were going through due diligence. And I remember I'd hired a bunch of attorneys for what back then was a relative bargain of probably $500 or $600 an hour. And they came in and they dove into a banker's box and started like rifling through all of our contracts. And I remember asking them at that time that, well, this must, we're a relatively small company. This must be a lot easier for the larger companies. And what they said was, you think it's easier for those larger companies? They said, first of all, you have a box. Second of all, the box doesn't contain a bunch of junk. Okay. They said in larger companies, it, was just a big Sherlock Holmes kind of, search mission. So, I was listening to that and I was like, okay, that's interesting. That's such critical information of really the DNA of your relationship with, I don't know, just your customers, your suppliers, and your employees. Other than that, what's in contracts, right? So the fact that this information is really hard for people to get their arms around, there must be something there. And 4 years later, or 5 years later, when I was looking at starting a new company, I went back to that problem and said, let me look into that contracts thing again and see if anybody solved it yet.
Interesting. So at that point, you said, I want to get into contracts. I want to develop a CLM. Like, what did the world look like? And what was your, what was your angle? What was your take on the problem and how you could impact it?
Yeah, so the first thing I did is I reached out to a bunch of people I knew who were general counsels or involved in contracts on the sales side or the vendor side. And I asked, this smattering of people, how many of them felt that this problem was under control? And what all of them kept pointing to, and remember, this is 2006, they kept pointing to a fundamental problem, which is we don't know even what we have out there. Okay, so every time we need to sell something new to an existing customer or we need to renegotiate with an existing vendor, it's like I have to put together a puzzle, okay, of understanding, wait, what did we sign with them 3 years ago? And was that ever amended? And then did we override that with some kind of an order form along the way? And so this puzzle became a common piece, and that became the DNA of the solution that we worked on as a founding team at Pramata and continues to be at the core of our solution today. I mean, granted, we've revolutionized and reinvented the platform along the way, but it's still, if you want to be proficient at contract management, you need to know what's in all of your existing paper. Because one little known fact is for most companies, 80% of the paper that they trade is rooted in something they've done in the past. Okay, so it's done in something that you either bought or sold somewhere along the way, and so that became the real impetus of building a company and building the company around.
Yeah. So it sounds like the first problem you wanted to tackle was helping companies get their arms around their contracts, right? Take their contracts,
Correct.
Extract the data, put it into a dashboard or a database of some kind that's searchable. Is that, describe like, how did you get your first customer or your first client? And what was like Pramata MVP?
Yeah, so, first I would like to humble brag a little bit, which is that our first customer is still very much a customer of Pramata. So not many companies can say that, 16, 17 years later, right? And so, what was interesting is it was more about just extracting the data from individual contracts and putting them in a database. And what I mean by that, I think one thing that I think all the lawyers on the call will know this is the concept of order of precedence, right? How information changes over time. Like this was originally termination right with, only termination for cause. Somewhere along the way, termination for convenience was entered. Somewhere along the way, somebody said it was 60 days. So when somebody wants to either do a new transaction with that customer or wants to, go and even meet with that customer, first thing, hey, what's really active today? What are my active provisions? What are my active terms as of today? So it was really about understanding how do you build that tree and really how do you build the database that underpins that and the algorithms that underpin that to roll all that information up, right? So that was really the fundamental thing. And the last example I'll give is take something as simple as expiration date. Oh, wouldn't it be great if all contracts just had a simple, this is the expiration date. But in our experience, other than things that are very low value, the vast majority of contracts, the expiration date is written something similar to it's 2 years from the date of, the first order, or 2 days, or, 180, it's 180 days after provisioning, or, there's all kinds of interesting things. So how you derive that has really, I think been a key differentiator for Pramata over many years. And our CTO has this beautiful slide where he shows the 11 things you need to know to be able to derive a truly accurate expiration date. Yeah, so that gives you an example of the kinds of things we focused on from our first customer onward. And they happen to be a customer that had very complex relationships with large banks and things like that. So that was really a big, hairy problem for them. Yeah.
That's great. So what is the name? How did you choose the name Pramata? Like, what is Pramata?
So Pramata is an ancient word from the Indian language of Sanskrit. And it means, there, like many of these ancient words, there are many meanings, but they all revolve around knowledge and the knower, okay? That which knows, right? And so it has to do with cognition and knowledge. So Pramata is really the thing that brings knowledge about contracts to our customers. So that's why and if you look at our logo, there's a little swoosh mark and there's a dot above it. And the dot is supposed to represent you, okay, the user, looking at all the information across all your contracts and contracting processes and knowing, where things are and how things work. Yeah.
Super cool. Super cool. I love that question. So all right, you started in 2006 and you were focused on, it sounds like, being a contract repository and
Yes.
adding search functionality. How has Pramata evolved? And like, how did you go from 5 customers to, I don't know, 50 customers to, 500 to whatever, right? To how did the platform grow over time?
Yeah, so for quite a long time, I'd say actually till about 3 years ago, we were really focused on that post-signature part of the contract management problem, right? And so if you were a company that really, even to this day, if you're a company that really needs to know what all your relationships look like with your contracts, like Pramata is the company, for you. So the way we deepen that over time is that, first of all, like you said, it is organizing all the contracts. It is what do you call it? Search functionality, reporting functionality. But we also deepened it by having a big tent in terms of who got value from that data. So yes, it was legal. Yes, it was the contract management team, but also some of the biggest users of our platform and of our data are finance, because they want to know things like, tell me about billing, both whether I'm paying something or whether I'm buying something. Tell me about compliance. Sales has been a huge advocate. We have customers actually that have thousands of sales reps that through their CRM log into Pramata every day to understand, hey, what are the contracts I have with each of my customers and what's coming up for renewal, for example, right? So, these have been real stakeholders. Procurement has been really good stakeholders. So really deepening that, who all needs to understand contracts in a business. And it turns out to be a very large group of people, right? And so that's really how we deepen that. And then how do you leverage that information to streamline your pre-signature process? How do you use it to create the right kinds of templates? How do you use it to understand, which are the clauses that you negotiate most? How do you get deeper into, what you see across your portfolio of contracts? Then how do you, quickly set up workflows? We're talking about hours, not days, so that, you can drive those templates through, request, draft, negotiate, approval, and sign. And so, that's how we took that advantage and that proficiency that we had with data, and we pushed it through the entire contract management or contract lifecycle management process.
Got it. So it sounds like you started with the focus on post-signature, and then you went back and tackled pre-signature.
Correct, yeah. And I think it's one thing we've seen in the industry. The vast majority of companies really focused a lot on standardization of the process and the templates and the language as the first problem. And the repository as kind of a side pocket or secondary problem. In our view, they actually go hand in hand and they go side by side, and you can make a lot of progress on both simultaneously. So it can't be that stuff shows up in your repository if it was perfectly drafted. Like, great, if only a world existed in which we could always push our paper and things weren't negotiated. We made it so that regardless of how a contract was generated, a joke I use is, I don't care if it even came in on a napkin, you need visibility on it, right? So in fact, if it came on a napkin, you probably especially need visibility on it. So, that's really, how you leverage post-signature to drive pre-signature and vice versa. That's really been a focus of our company. Yeah.
So I want to expand on that a little bit and talk about CL, like the industry generally. What do you think? There's a lot of competition in the CLM market. A lot of, feels like every day there's somebody who's interested in tackling contracts generally. Maybe not a full-blown CLM, but there's AI tools and so on. What makes Pramata different? What's Pramata's unique, value prop in this, I guess, industry?
Yeah, so I'd say that if I talk about the incumbent generation, not the upstarts, so to speak, like talk about there's a new company. Let's split these two groups of people, right? Because I think the differentiator is different depending on which group. So if I look at all the CLM companies that have come into prominence over the last 10 years, right? Again, like I was saying earlier, has been a lot of focus on standardization and workflow and templating. And so the whole idea is that if you can figure out a way to essentially minimize the amount of true creativity in the contracting process, right? And you can keep people within guardrails, and you can make sure those guardrails are policed by, approval cycles, et cetera, then the system will work really, really well. And what we've noticed is that, it did, for those companies, work quite well with things like NDAs or simple statements of work, relatively simple types of contracts that can be highly automated. But when you get into the meaty stuff, the stuff where negotiation really takes place, and frankly, the place where contract teams, whether it's legal, whether it's contract management or other parts of the business, should be spending most of their time, okay? The stuff that requires, human horsepower. We are humans of legal tech here, right? So when you look at the complicated stuff, that standardization model runs into a brick wall, okay? Like, you can't go to a Fortune 100 company and say, this like $100 million supply agreement you have, it can be standardized. No, it's not going to be standardized. Or even a $1 million, agreement, or, if you're selling something similarly. And so where I think Pramata has really distinguished itself is, let's give you a whole solution that works when you can standardize stuff and works when you can't standardize stuff. Do you see what I mean? It's not imperative to have all of this change management in place. And so that's what we really mean when we say radically simple. It's like, we'll take your data as is. We'll take your contracts, give us the ugliest contracts, give us the simplest contracts. It's fine. We'll make sure they all get organized. You want to do simple workflows, you can create simple workflows. You want to create complex workflows, you can create complex workflows. So how do you keep everything, so it works? You don't have to change your process to adhere to the software. Do you see what I mean? You can actually, meet the businesses where they are in the real world. So I think that's a huge differentiator with Pramata's approach.
So I guess walk us through, a new customer onboarding. What would that look like? And are there average times for implementation, for getting them up and running? Does it workflows? Does Pramata provide, support in that regard?
Yeah, so one of the key brand premises that we have is that we say we do the heavy lifting for you. And what I mean by that is that we are an end-to-end solution. So not only do we provide the software, but we also provide the humans in the loop, so that for any automations that are required, whether it's for data extraction, data normalization, integrations, et cetera, we include all of that as part of our package. And that's one of the things that makes it radically simple. Now, obviously, when you deal with very large enterprises, they have their own teams and you collaborate with their teams, et cetera. But I think particularly for legal departments that are, with mid-sized companies, maybe have limited access to resources, technical resources, IT resources, that keeping it simple right, is very, very, very critical. So part of that brand promise is that for all customers, we like to define the really big value milestone, like a really good adoption milestone, within 30 to 60 days. Okay. And you might say that's a broad amount of time, but honestly, when we look at the people who've come to Pramata switching from other solutions, many of them were 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years into other things and had like a 10% penetration in terms of the percentage of their contracts that were either going through the system or in the system, or 30%, penetration. So getting really far within 30 to 60 days is critical. And again, the way we start that is we tell people, just upload all your files, okay? Don't cleanse them before you send them to us, okay? We have a cleanse process that dedupes everything, figures out which ones are contracts, which ones have been fully signed, which ones are master agreements, which ones are, amendments, order forms, et cetera. And so we do all of that. Do you see what I mean? And when there are exceptions, our team, the human in the loop, works through those exceptions, to make sure that they're manually, cleansed or brought back into the set, because, all automations have dropouts, right? And then in parallel with doing that, we say, if there are quick workflows that you want to get started up, maybe NDA automation, simple statement of work automation, let's get that started up in the first week. Let's figure out if you already have a template form, let's leverage that template form. We're doing great things with GenAI so that we can actually help you derive a template form from contracts that you've signed in the past. And so we can make it so you don't even have to create the template form. It can be created for you. So there's all kinds of interesting, things that you can do to make this go really fast. And we think that's what the market should be demanding, which is, I want a full system that works across all of my contracts, and I want it up and running fast.
Yeah. So we had talked about this before, and you kind of alluded to this in your answer just now. There seems to be a low customer satisfaction level with CLM tools generally. Can you talk about that? Why do you think that is, and what does Pramata do to address that?
Yeah, so I think that all systems, and it's not just CLM, but it's in almost any enterprise software category, there's a very happy path in which, if things follow the happy path, everybody's going to be happy, which is, yeah, look at this simple form. Look, boom, I can put in the name of the counterparty, and boom, I can put in what's the term, and boom, I could just say, these are the things that are covered in this, and bada boom, bada bing, it gets generated, it gets automatically sorted into the repository, it's reportable in the right place. Who wouldn't be happy about this, right? I think the reason why there's a lot of disillusionment with CLM is because so many things that those of us in contract management, again, I sign contracts too as the head of a company, those of us how many things really fall into that happy path, and how many important things fall into that happy path. And so now, oh, well, yes, you can resolve that problem, but you got to click this button, then you have to manually enter in this information. Then you got to click this other button, then you got to send it to another person. And let me take you to the fourth screen, and let me show you how all that works. So you get into that complexity as soon as you get out of the happy path. And as far as the history, sure, here's our AI button that will just suck all the data out of all your history. And then you look at that data and you're like, none of this makes any sense. This is like all, there's that old saying, garbage in, garbage out, right? So I think people were sold that this thing is going to make everything a lot easier. And not only in many cases, or I'd say maybe even a majority of cases, did it not make things easier. It meant I now need to hire somebody to manage this system and feed the beast. I now need to train my people to enter in data in a very specific way. I now need to, there's a whole bunch of new things that were added to the process. So is it speeding things up? Is it making our life easier? And so I think that that's the reason why there's a lot of disillusionment, because things prove to be more complicated to implement in the real world, especially when you were dealing with situations that weren't relatively simple templates, relatively simple workflows that could be, straightforwardly automated.
Got it. I want to see Pramata in action. So before we do that, just curious, GenAI, you mentioned it just now. Can you talk a little bit about, what Pramata is doing in the GenAI world or feature base, and how do you think that'll impact CLM technology moving forward? Yeah.
So I'll tell this to everybody, on the call, because almost all of you are probably starting to hear the GenAI hype. And the GenAI hype right now is probably where the smartphone was in 2007, when Apple first released like the iPhone 1, and everybody knew some really cool forward-looking friend that was playing around for it, but most of us were still clutching to our Blackberries and saying, hey, I need my physical keyboard. Don't take this. That's a toy for those creative types, right? But you remember what happened from 2007 to 2009. Suddenly you went from, oh, only the creative types were using smartphones to, wow, my parents want one. It's like suddenly gone, oh,
Right.
wow, that 11-year-old really wants to use this. It seems to be better at it than I am. And so it went very quickly. So Gen AI is between those two stages, and it's not a feature for contract management. It's actually going to fundamentally change the way that all the phases of contract, particularly in pre-signature, in my view, is going to change the way that that entire process works. I mean, the process of doing requests, I think it'll be much more, someone will be able to email a proposal into an email bot, and the email bot will be able to look at that proposal and draft a first draft contract from it without even filling out a form, because that proposal will already tell you who's the customer, what are the terms, how do they deviate, et cetera. And then it should be able to automatically figure out what approvals are needed, et cetera. Should be able to say, take an existing hairy document and say, I'd like to amend this with these 3 things, and create a pretty darn good first draft, okay, that you can then roll into. And leading early adopters, including early adopters in our customer base, are already using Gen AI to start to do these things. But my point is that so we actually, I would say it's a fortunate coincidence, we totally overhauled our platform 3 years ago, right, and modernized the whole thing, which meant that as GPT-3 came out and GPT-4 then came out, the Gen AI platform, we were able to embed it right in the heart of our platform. So now we can use Gen AI capabilities and services literally anywhere in our platform. So whether it's that request, drafting, negotiation process, reporting, and Tom, from our team will show some of this in the demo. So I guess, my simple response to everybody is that within 3 years, there'll be nothing that we're doing in legal tech that isn't Gen AI. It will be everything, okay? I mean, it'll be in everything, and it won't be a feature. It'll just be a question of which platforms and which companies are leveraging it more effectively. That's what it's going to be. It's not going to be some side thing. So, and it'll happen very quickly within 24 to 36 months.
Okay, well, that sounds super exciting. I think we're seeing it now. We've talked a ton about Pramata. Let's see Pramata in action. So Tom, I'm going to invite you to join us. Say, Tom, welcome. Feel free to share your screen and we'll take a look at Pramata. And folks, if you have questions as the demo goes on, feel free to put it in the chat, or I will feed it to Tom. So Tom, take us away.
Thank you, Shai. Thank you, Praful. Appreciate that. So yeah, I'm here to show you a little bit about Pramata. And so, first of all, I really appreciated the conversation you guys were having around the logo and how, we've got, so I'll just point that out quickly to you. And I guess today I'll be playing the part of the dot, showing you kind of what it's like to have the ability to know about your contracts. So we'll just jump in here. So, I guess I'll start kind of where your conversation started, which is the origin story of Pramata, which is that there's this challenge where Prabal talked about, trying to deal with the fact that there was a merger going on between two different companies. And at that time, he was dealing with the fact that there are boxes of contracts. You had to kind of rifle through, figure out what was what in there. And so Pramata actually, as part of our methodology, and when we talk about, how to implement, how to onboard a contract management system, we actually have thought deeply about this process that we call cleanse, which is essentially you've got, and you may have a situation where you've got multiple M&A activities going on all over the place, so you end up with multiple repositories. But at any rate, at some even if you just have one repository, that repository maybe have duplicates in there, and maybe have partially signed agreements, and maybe have things that aren't even contracts at all. And when you talk about wanting to, do that reporting and really know about your contracts, even be able to identify simple things like, how many vendors do we have? How many customers do we have? How many contracts total do we have? Those problems can be challenging. And Pramata kind of does the heavy lifting for you of cleansing that document set. So that now, okay, great. We now got all the sort of noise out of that data set. And now we can focus on, these are the agreements we're actually doing business off of. So that's kind of that first cleanse process. So now, as Shai, you mentioned, you've got your arms around the data, and now you can start to do some more interesting things. So the next thing that really you're going to want to do is organize things, get things organized. So first step in organization is, whether you're dealing with customers or vendors or partners, you're going to want to have some concept of an account or a folder where you've got all of those contracts in one place. And what's great is when you go into this folder here or this account, you're not going to have to deal with that noise because the noise is already taken care of. Now okay, great. There's one master agreement sitting here. I know it's from July 15th, 2017. This is the one we're actually doing business off of. Okay, great. I can start to answer some questions. And one of the things that, if you look at that order of precedence, I'll talk a little bit about that. The first step there is, well, you see you've got a main governing agreement here, whether it's a master agreement or whatever nomenclature you're using. And then you've got these agreements that are associated with it, orders, amendments, addendums, exhibits, all kinds of things that you can have as sort of child agreements. So again, Pramata actually, the system does the work of organizing things by an account and actually associating these agreements with each other.
Yeah, and this is a critical point, Tom, real quick. And, Shai, it goes back to what we were talking to. Pramata does this for you, okay? And the reason why that's important is we've had attorneys come to us and say that, especially when I'm dealing with highly negotiated relationships, this step alone of constructing what's what and how they tie together takes like 2 to 3 hours. Like the actual drafting process might take 20 minutes once you have this all figured out. But if you don't have this figured out, you just don't know where to begin because you have to figure out how it all ties together, right? And so that's an example of how this is impacting pre-signature, but it's actually about a post-signature problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It's essentially all that organizational work where we found, we even did a survey at one point and looked at how many times are people piecing this puzzle together. We talked, you talked about the puzzle earlier today. How many people are doing that every single day? And we found that there's literally, depending on the size of the organization, obviously, it can be dozens of people that are recreating this puzzle over and over and over again to do various things, whether it be to understand, what your renewal picture, or whether it be to, draft a new agreement. Sometimes people end up, well, we didn't know we had a master, so we actually created another one. Now your relationship is more complex. So by having this clean, organized data set, you're already off to a great start in terms of being able to better manage your contracts and get this data to the people who need it to do their jobs. Yeah, and so then, order of precedent, this is where, let's talk about like that, the 11 things. I think you talked about the 11 things that you need to derive end dates. Let's just talk about that because it's a really interesting use case. Seemingly simple, right? It's, all I'm trying to do is figure out when this thing starts and when it ends. Well, it turns out it's not that easy. It turns out you actually have to, first of all, identify what kind of term is it. So, there are many types of terms out there. There are auto renewals and fixed terms and coterminous agreements and agreements that end on the last day of the last order, all these different flavors, right? And you need to treat each of those differently as you're trying to figure out when it starts and ends. And so the first thing that Pramata does is you'll see right here, this is called the digital snapshot. I just want to point out what this is. So one of the nice things that we do is that Pramata creates this digital snapshot that takes you directly to the source of the data. One of the things we hear a lot of is, I do want good, clean data. I also want to be able to verify that data, go directly to the source of that data to get more context about where that data point came from. That's what this digital snapshot does. And we find it can be super powerful. You'll see that as I move on to other parts of the platform, this snapshot sort of follows the data along so that you can always get back to where it came from. But back to the renewal picture. So you've got an auto, let's say this is an auto renewal. So we've identified where it is. We know it's an auto renewal. Now you're going to need to extract the precise data from this big block of text that you need to derive this end date. And the derivation point is super important because this, as Prabhu mentioned, this data, it would be great if this date was just sitting in that contract somewhere, but it's not. It's in there as essentially a little formula for how you get to the end date. And so Pramata, again, the system derives this end date for you so that you don't have to go through that. It will even, and this is where that order of precedence really kicks in, you may start out with a master agreement from July 16th, 2017 that has a 24-month fixed term. That's the agreement you came to. You didn't want to do any sort of auto renewals because you weren't sure how this was going to work out. Maybe agreed to an extra year to get some better pricing, but you didn't want to do an auto renewal. Then you decide right before that thing ends that you wanted to go ahead and make it an auto renewal. So you come along and amend it. All of this materially changes the picture over here when we're talking about how you drive these end dates. So, piecing all of this puzzle together is super important. Prabal, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is, and going back, Shai, to when we were talking about value across the business beyond legal and contract managers. So this information, while it's important, a new contract is being negotiated, it's really important to finance if they're trying to understand billing compliance or payment, PO compliance, right? It's really important to sales if they want to understand which customers should I be talking to about a renewal, and what paper should I be working off of in terms of working on the renewal. So it's really this is the reason why looking at the data this way makes it very flexible across the enterprise, and we're really focused on ensuring that everyone who can get value from contract information is getting value from contract information. So, Tom, I think in the interest of time, maybe we want to, show some of the reporting across portfolio and then move into the pre-signature parts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, let's talk about that. So, once you have all of that data organized and cleansed, now you can start to do the things like reporting. You can obviously create dashboards where you can use visual analytics. I'm going to dig into the data just because I think that's an important piece of this. Having the right data enables those analytical dashboards to be created. So, if you want to, let's talk specifically about, let's say you want to go into your agreements and find, every limitation of liability clause in your agreements. I want to stop here and talk about this just for a quick moment. So first of all, you'll remember those digital snapshots. So those digital snapshots are also used to capture, every single limitation of liability provision. And you'll see here, this is actually that digital snapshot turned into text. The reason I tell you all of this is because we talked a little bit about generative AI earlier, and this is where it's really important that you're able to give in the garbage in, garbage out problem. So the way that Pramata addresses that garbage in, garbage out problem is with these targeted data sets, targeted digital snapshots, where now I can say, okay, now that I've got these digital snapshots identified, now I'm going to say, okay, let's use generative AI to categorize this data, to find out what different types of limitation of liability provisions are there. You can load your standard provision in there and say, of all of these provisions, which ones are standard and which ones are not standard. You can either take the approach of saying, if even one word or part of that clause is non-standard, I want you to flag it. Or you can be a little bit more nuanced and say, if this generally meets our business requirements, then I want you to flag this as standard. I don't want you to flag it as a non-standard provision. So this is one of those ways that you can use generative AI. And again, I think Praful mentioned this, our system is actually designed to embed this capability in various different places. This is one of the places where you can start to look at the whole portfolio of data, start to filter things down, get into some deeper analysis from there.
Quick question. Did you just press the button like export clause and it like generated those extra fields, like all that information below? Is there like a chat, like a chat bot function?
There is, absolutely. So you could say, this is a very broad prompt. You could be much more specific than this. And what you can do is, it's going to give me an output here. You can actually zero in on this and say, oh, it looks like, for instance, it's giving me multiple different subsections. You could say, now write this all as one paragraph, for instance. That would be another prompt where you would add on to this. So yes, and again, the key to this here, the reason these chat bots are great, you don't want to just put this on top of that big pile of files that we started with. But what you do want to do is use, okay, great, we've got a zeroed in data set where we know we're looking at all of these specific provisions. Now we can start to do some more chatting with this and get much better results. Avoiding things like the hallucinations we all hear about. and things like that, where you end up with some problems with that data.
Very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, so one quick thing I'll do before heading over to the pre-signature piece, I just want to flash something really quickly for you. So we talked about empowering the business. One of the things that we do is we have an integration. This is just one example. You can also, do this in finance systems and other types of systems. But this is just an example of in a CRM system where you can take this data and actually make it available, including like the digital snapshots, make this available right inside of a separate system. So we think about this as empowering the business. So
But this is Salesforce.com for those who don't recognize it. Yes. Mhm.
Yeah. So instead of saying, hey, we want you to get a new login to a new system and learn this new system and figure out what's going on in there, instead of that, you can say, you know what, we're going to give you access to precisely what you need inside of Salesforce in this case. So this can be a really powerful tool as well. And we have, in some cases, thousands of sales users on this, hitting that system every single day.
Hey, Tom, since you were in the GenAI part of the post-signature, are there a couple of other things you wanted to share there before you go to pre-signature? I know I'm giving you contradictory guidance, but I know you already clicked the button, so to speak, so you might as well roll with it if you'd like. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing that I think would be good to show is that the fact that, well, we can do another, well, I'll give you one more example maybe of a report. So you could do the same type of report for assignment. You could do the same type of analysis for assignment. You can also pop over here. Let me just go into an account, and there's a couple different things we could do here. So let's say, you're reviewing an account and you're reviewing what's going on with this master agreement. You can go over to this GenAI Assist tab, and the first thing that you could do here that's fairly simple is you could say, okay, give me a summary of the key provisions of this master agreement. We find this to be actually super valuable because if you're just trying to get a handle of, what's actually the key things that I need to understand about this agreement, you can quickly understand that. You could also say, let me refresh my screen here. You could also say, and this is what's interesting. You talked about this a little bit in the interview there, but I think when we talk about pre-signature versus post-signature and them being sort of parallel, I think was the phrase that was used, parallel tracks. This is where what are we really talking about, pre-signature or post-signature? What if I have a playbook and I have a master agreement that I know is not compliant with that playbook? It's a brand new playbook. We just did it earlier this year. And I want to draft an amendment to this agreement to make it compliant with that playbook. Now, is this a pre-signature or a post-signature use case? I don't know. We could debate that. It's, but the point is what's happening here is the system is now going into this master agreement. It's looking at a very specific playbook that I pointed it at. So that playbook has things like, standard assignment provision, standard limitation liability provision, those sorts of things. And now it's going to write me an amendment, and I can even pop that amendment open and pull it over here for you. And all of this, you're going to see some specific formatting. All of this can be modified. This is all like actually quite easy to modify, but this is just one form of this. So now you've quickly gotten kind of a first draft of an amendment. And that can be pretty powerful. So this is where you're seeing, we've seen now an example of GenAI embedded in kind of the portfolio level analysis. This is more of a targeted use case of, hey, some of our customers have talked about, we actually do have an initiative right now where we want to go amend every single one of our agreements to do something like maybe update, because GenAI is coming on the scene, maybe you want to update your data privacy provisions inside of your agreements or something like that. By building a fairly simple playbook, you can sort of automate the generation of those amendments so that whether you want to do that at renewal time or whether or not you want to do it at, all at once, you can kind of quickly get to that piece as well.
And Tom, does Pramata provide, support to do this? Is it all, user generate? Like how does, I can imagine busy legal team, even if they have legal ops support, they don't have all the time in the world to make these playbooks. Does Pramata help? And
we do provide support. I'm going to quickly flash this. I'm not going to dig into the details of this, but I do want to point this out. So With generative AI, right? So first of all, Pramata is sort of agnostic to the LLM. So if you have an LLM that you're already using at your organization, you could hook it up to Pramata. The point I'm making here, though, is that, so first of all, yes, Pramata will help support that. First of all, you can use your existing data to help you define your playbooks. And then what I'm showing you here is we've actually built a platform where you can build experiences and modify those experiences as you move forward. So with playbooks, one of the things that we're finding is that people, yes, they might not come to the table with a playbook, but you saw how I, for instance, drafted that provision by using the chatbot. What you can do is you can say, create these standard provisions based on our existing data. And so we're getting you right up to the place where we're giving you all the tools you need, and we'll certainly give you all the support you need to make sure you can use those tools. Ultimately, those decisions do need to be made at the organization in terms of what are your standards and so forth, but we can provide you the tools and the guidance for how to get there.
Yeah, I mean, just to give an example, again, it sounds space age, but we've actually done this with multiple customers. You can send us, or if we already have it in the repository, some of the agreements that you believe best exemplify good contracting practice. And you can use GenAI to take those and say, can you generate me a playbook based on these 5 contracts, using them as the standard? And so now that's the first draft of your playbook. Do you see what I mean? And then it's up to you as the organization, as Tom was saying, to adjust the playbook accordingly. And so there's a really straightforward way to generate the initial draft and then to update that information based on what your company's standards are. Yeah.
Yeah. Or even if it's a single template, we can do that and start there and see where you and modify it from there. A couple quick things here. I am conscious of time. So I want to talk a little bit about pre-signature. So, first of all, we've got a place to centralize your requests, create a request form so that people can request their own agreements. You can auto-generate agreements. I showed you the ways to use GenAI to auto-generate agreements. You can also generate them directly in our pre-signature tool so that when you have a new request that comes in, it enters the queue. Maybe it gets queued up gets automatically sent to the person who should be working on that agreement. They could open up and look and say, okay, here's the agreement that's come in. I've kind of set this up already, so it's already started, but just giving you an idea of what this would look like. So let me give you a scenario. You get a first draft of the agreement in, it goes out for red lines, it comes back, and you do want to take a look at the red lines of that agreement. So this would be the red line version. And then what you can do from here is you can use a plugin here that will actually give you an analysis. You can do a couple different things in here. You could either compare it to an earlier draft. You could compare it to a previous deal. So let's say you signed a deal 3 years ago, and this is a new deal you're working on. You could compare it to that. Or I'm going to go directly to the playbook analysis, which is, again, this idea of you probably have some standards you're working towards, and you want to say, hey, this has been redlined 4 or 5 times, maybe it's gone back and forth, and I want to know, as of today, right now, what has materially changed in this agreement, taking into account all those red lines. And so you can see over here, there's a red, yellow, green paradigm. And so and there's some specific provisions called out. So these are the provisions that have changed. And green means that it meets your standard and it's fine. There's nothing you need to do to change it. Red means that it does not meet your standards. So this is, for whatever reason, they redlined it and brought it outside of your standards. And in this case, brought it from 30 to 45 days for a payment term. And then yellow is really interesting because what we've done here is that we're leveraging that ability to create that clean repository. And yellow means, yes, it's not standard, but you've agreed to it before with this customer or with this vendor. And so that can be a really interesting data point because, hey, do I want to renegotiate this again? Do I want to just let it fly because we've already dealt with it? Or do I want to go ahead and change it? And so that you can use auto red lines to do that, and you can see it auto red. Go ahead.
And the reason why I think that yellow is so important is because anyone who's ever had to deal with output from a robo-lawyer on the other end, and I've seen the output myself in a couple of negotiating situations, it's really annoying when the AI or the automation shows up with language that previously that you've agreed to, And is it even in dispute? And you have to kind of go through again, and you all because someone told it, oh, if it's this, always change it this. It's like, yeah, we hashed this out a year ago when we did this deal. Can we just move on with our lives, right? And so this is the way in which people will, like the way we're doing it, how you tame the beast of Gen AI, right? Which is you make it smarter and smarter by providing it more and more context. And that's the thing I think the world will have to realize is it's not a magic box that you can throw everything at and it'll be all knowing. At least not yet. I think we have 5 years before it becomes all knowing. But until then, you have to give it the context of exactly, hey, compare it against the playbook, but also compare it against what I've done before, specifically for each of these provisions. And then you can start to get intelligent advice.
And so, we could show a lot more. I want to be cognizant of time.
So-
Prabal knows I can keep demoing for hours and hours if we wanted to, but I know we wanted to leave some time for questions and things at the end to wrap things up. Shai, maybe back to you and guide us for where to go next.
Yes. So a couple of things. One, is there, so this looks like an online version of Word here.
Mhm.
If I edit the contract in Word, does it show up in Pramata? Like, is there Word integration? Like, how does that interplay work?
So this integration is with Microsoft 365. So this is the Microsoft 365 version of this agreement. You can create prompts that work on like a native Word document that's on your native machine. It's just the experience isn't quite as slick. You basically would be having that experience in more of a context window setting. So you can compare, like there's an analyze red lines where you could say, hey, I uploaded an agreement. Now give me that feedback. But the specific plugin that you looked at is for Microsoft 365. And that's because of all the APIs they're providing and so forth. So the same like logical output can be achieved. It's just that the user experience is a little bit different if you're not using an online version.
Okay, but like Pramata integrates with Microsoft, with Google, with Outlook, with Gmail, all the
So just because you mentioned Outlook, for instance, you can like request an agreement directly from Outlook. You can, we have some, if you're doing some commenting back and forth, and you can get email notifications and people can respond from their emails like in Outlook and so forth. So those types of things.
Like Shai, the design principle is no approver should ever have to log into Pramata to approve something. They should be able to do it directly from their email, right? Yeah. So, it's the people who live in Word and live in the contract management system can live there. But for the majority of people, you want to meet them where they are, whether that's CRM for salespeople or email for other types of users. And with GenAI, we have some next generation stuff I've seen that's in the hopper. And I know sometimes our team is like, oh, like, are you gonna let the cat out of the bag? But like I was saying, really having email become a primary mechanism for even generating a brand new request without even filling out a form, getting context from things like uploading a proposal, either from a sales rep or from a vendor, shooting a spreadsheet saying, this is the pricing that I'd like in the proposal, having it directly reflected in the contract. Those are the kinds of things that we're now able to do with some of our leading edge customers using GenAI and email and Pramata. So, I think email, ironically, is going to be a really cool user experience, with this as GenAI gets smarter and smarter. Yeah.
Definitely. So you kind of touched on this, but what does the flow look like for business users? Do they have a login, a separate login for Pramata? Is it the same as legals? How does that work?
Well,
let me answer that. Let me answer that question. So look, in the ideal world, business users, especially in the request through signature process, right, should have to log into Pramata as little as possible, right? If you're a sales user, all of your interactions with Pramata should be either through CRM or email. And if you're a non-sales user, you really want the contract management system to be for contract management people and for legal to manage their workload, right? That's it, right? And so, for the most part, for a business user, it's, hey, if you're, if a request is, so if you need to generate a request, like, again, there are multiple places you can find that button, either in your email client or in CRM. So you don't need to log into Pramata, especially, et cetera. You have a link that's given to you to the contract request. So you can go into that contract request and figure out like track it along the way. If you're an approver, you should be able to approve directly using a button inside your email that's sent to you. So all those things are really trying to minimize your need to learn a new system. Now, the business users that should log in directly to Pramata and do stuff inside Pramata are people who really want to leverage that reporting and analytics that we talked about. And Tom purposely did not, because we know this is a legal audience, didn't highlight the kinds of ways in which people look up price escalators and figure out, where they should be, billing things. You can check invoices against current pricing. So there are all kinds of things that you can do for non-legal users. So you should log into Pramata to do that stuff if you are that kind of an analyst business user, but not if you're just in the contract request and approval workflow. The goal is to keep it very simple for you.
Gotcha. And I mean, Tom, can you show us some more about the reporting capabilities? I think that would be really interesting to look.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a couple of different examples. So price escalators, since we talked about it, one of the common use cases that we have with business users is they want to know, where can we raise prices? Where can our vendors raise prices on us? And so this is the kind of report that you can pull up very quickly and say, first of all, where is it? How many do we have? How many price escalators do we have out there that are active, that we can actually use? And then, is it a fixed price escalator? Is it what's the percentage? Is it tied to an index of some kind? So is it, how many days notice do we have to give? So we have a very specific use case of this, and this is where we talk about kind of the integrations that you can use. Is once you have this data and you're confident that you've cleansed it and organized it and got it all in good shape, you can actually send this data directly into, like, let's say, a billing system, so that you know where you can raise prices. And it can be we have some customers that are getting some really hard ROI out of those types of use cases. They're super powerful. And then one other thing that I can quickly show you that I think is pretty compelling. I'm just going to pop over here. Moment. All right. So this is another, Praful mentioned this one. If you want to, what this use case is really taking a look at, this would be an agreement where you want to look at, let's say you have some tiered pricing in there where, based on the units sold, your pricing will usually tier down. What this can do is you can actually line up the billing data. And this is, again, starting to get into kind of a generative AI use case. You can line up the billing data and say, did we charge this customer correctly based on the tiered pricing that we have? And you can do this across the portfolio too. I'm kind of showing you one specific example from one account, but you can very quickly understand, yes, there was a buying error. This is kind of the summary of it. The billed amount is under the accurate amount. So right here, there's a billing issue. Whether or not you choose to go try to recover that, or whether or not you choose to correct it on a go-forward basis. But this can be the really kind of powerful use cases that you can use and by taking not just the contracts data, but the billing data, mapping those two things together, and then creating this is another really kind of high-powered ROI use case.
Yeah, super cool. I could
see.
Yeah,
Shai.
Yeah, go ahead, please, Praful.
Yes, I think that one thing we're seeing is in a lot of places now, legal is being challenged for, can you show me the ROI from contract management investments that's beyond efficiency, right? Because budgets are tight and CFOs are really digging, under the floorboards, trying to figure out what's really going on. And this is a great way to ally with other parts of the organization, whether it's finance or pricing teams or vendor management teams, to be able to, show other ways to get at the ROI.
Yeah, I love this. This is something that the business will definitely understand. Last question, and then we'll wrap up, right? And that's the $64,000 question. How does pricing work? Is it seat-based? Is it something else? And what's like a typical, I guess, range of fee?
Yeah, so, Pramata, because, our tagline, our brand promise is radically simple contract management, it's been very important for us to actually make our pricing radically simple. And so the pricing for the product is really based on the number of contracts that you have inside the system. We have tiers. So for companies with less than 1,000 contracts, it's one price. If it's companies who are less than 5,000, it's another price. And it goes up to there into, 100,000 plus. And then for enterprises, of course, then you have a deeper discussion on how to organize it. And so once you understand the tier, then it's, do you want post-signature? Do you want pre-signature? Do you want both, right? And then do you want to enable the GenAI functions or not? So really three choices, okay? So figure out your tier, and then you have three choices, right? Do you want, post-signature, pre-signature, and then after you've chosen those, do you want the GenAI functionality as well? We have no user-based pricing, okay? It's unlimited users for all of our products. And the reason for that is that it's our view that if you're running a contract management program, you want to get it in the hands of as many people as possible, okay? So you want to, really push it out there and get it across the organization. Now, the last thing I'll say is that our products include, for post-signature, the document digitization. And so we have a simple fee that's associated with bringing in all of your old contracts or anything that you have in all kinds of various repositories into the system and getting it cleansed into the high 90s in terms of accuracy. And that's all fixed price. So there's no time and materials, et cetera. And the goal is to make it so there's almost no resource allocation required by the customer, except for, helping us out with, high level, design, some questions that we have that we try to make into a straightforward survey on the front end. So you should not need to hire people to rip data. You should not need to hire people to, figure out what's in all those files. You don't need armies of consultants, walking around the house. The idea is to make it a very simple implementation model with a fixed price that is predictable. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Now I want to say thank you, Praful and Tom. Now we know what Pramata means and why it is in fact the simple, radically simple LM tool. And it's been wonderful to chat with you and to see Pramata up close. Really, really interesting. Folks, if you want to get in touch with Pramata, please let us know. I guess we'll wrap up over here. No more questions. Praful and Tom, back to you for closing remarks, and then we'll wrap up for the day.
Really appreciate everyone's time and attention. We appreciate you spending the time with us today. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll want to add is, obviously at Pramata, we're focused on radically simple. And as any of you look at contract management, I just urge you to look at the following principles. See whether the product you're looking at and the vendor you're talking to is really going to make your life simpler. And not simpler like 2 years in the future or 3 years in the future. We're talking about in less than 30 days and less than 60 days. Are they going to simplify what you and your team need to do so you can focus on high value add things? And then also, are they providing value not just to your legal department and not just to legal operations, but are they providing value across the organization, right? Because contracts are one of those things that touches every single corner of your organization, and it should be easy for people to get access to that information to do their jobs. It should not be this dark art that's hidden behind 6 veils that you need to find the special code to unlock. So remember, keep it radically simple, and it should get only simpler from here. And eventually it should be as easy as when an 8-year-old uses an iPhone. That's what I say. So look forward to that day when all of this really, really, really easy contract management. And I think we're pretty close at Pramata, and we're getting closer every day. So thanks a lot for the opportunity, Shai, to talk to your audience. Thanks everybody for tuning in and listening, and happy to talk to any of you if you're interested in learning more about Pramata.
All right. Thank you so much, Praful and Tom and Pramata. Thanks everybody for tuning in. It's been a wonderful conversation. Really enjoyed it. And again, I see now why Pramata called itself the radically simple CLM solution. I agree. It's radically simple. So thank you again.